He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, his mind restless, drowning in thoughts about the life that stretched ahead of him. Though the house around him was silent, one sound broke through, the soft, melodious voice of his wife. To anyone else, her voice might have been sweet and comforting, but to him it was a torment. That voice, belonging to the woman who had given her heart to him, was to him among the most unbearable sounds in the world. The reason was not that she had wronged him, but because he could not love her. His heart was chained elsewhere, tied to another woman he had once wanted to marry, but fate had taken a different turn. His wife, however, knew this truth. She was aware that he loved someone else. Yet she never confronted him, never questioned him, never even hinted at bitterness. Instead, she carried herself with an obedience that seemed almost unreal. If he declared red to be blue, she would nod and accept it. If he ordered silence, she would retreat into quiet submission. She respected him deeply, loved him purely, and honored him with every breath she took. But her devotion, instead of softening him, only made his resentment grow stronger. Her very presence was a reminder of the life he had not chosen. What made the situation even more unbearable was the fact that his parents adored her. They treated her as their own daughter, constantly praising her virtues and showering her with affection. His father admired her manners, and his mother never tired of blessing her. While they admired her, he burned inside with bitterness, suffocated by their affection toward the woman he despised. At times he felt as though he was a stranger in his own house, as if he no longer belonged to the life he was living. Each glance she gave him, full of love and loyalty, felt like a chain around his neck. Each act of kindness she performed, laying his clothes neatly, serving his meals carefully, speaking softly, only fed his desire to be free from her. He could not forgive her for existing in a place that he believed should have belonged to the woman he loved. On the very day he was forced into marriage, he had silently promised himself that he would one day rid his life of her presence. Now, as he turned over on the bed to avoid her gaze, he knew tears would be glistening in her eyes, though she would never complain. But he had no sympathy left in him. His heart was cold, his mind restless, and his resolve clear. Sooner or later, she would no longer be a part of his life. Time moved slowly in that household, but bitterness within him only grew deeper with each passing day. What enraged him the most was not only his wife's presence, but the way his parents cherished her. His mother often called her daughter and never missed a chance to embrace her warmly. His father would proudly speak of her manners, her gentle nature, and her loyalty. Everyone around him seemed to admire her, while he silently carried a storm of hatred in his chest. Their constant affection for her felt like daggers, reminding him that he was trapped in a marriage he had never wanted. He avoided her whenever he could, but there were moments when escape was impossible. Her eyes would follow him with concern whenever he entered a room. She would rise quickly, ready to serve him before he even asked. If he ignored her words, she would fall silent without complaint. If he turned his face away in coldness, she would lower her head and accept it. To his parents, this was proof of her greatness, but to him, it was suffocating. The more she remained patient and obedient, the more he felt poisoned by her presence. 6 months after their marriage, his father announced with excitement that it was time for their honeymoon. He had expected perhaps a trip to another country, something lavish and grand, but instead, his father decided they should travel to Saudi Arabia. "It will give you both the chance to perform Umrah," his father explained proudly, as though the idea was a blessing. His wife's face lit up at the news. Her eyes sparkled with a joy he had never given her. For days, she busied herself with preparations, packing carefully, asking him about the smallest details, and placing everything neatly for his comfort. Her enthusiasm only deepened his resentment. He, on the other hand, saw in this trip the opportunity he had been waiting for. At last, he could rid himself of her. His mind, always scheming, whispered a cruel plan. Once in Saudi Arabia, he would take her papers, her passport, and her documents. He would leave her behind, helpless and undocumented. The authorities would believe she had entered illegally. She would vanish from his life, and he would finally be free. Every glance she cast at him during those days of preparation filled him with irritation. She smiled too much, trusted him too easily, and never doubted his loyalty. She thought she was about to embark on a sacred journey with her husband, while he was secretly plotting to abandon her in a foreign land. The contrast between her innocence and his malice was stark, and in that imbalance, his cruelty only sharpened. The days slipped by quickly, and soon the date of departure drew near. His wife's joy only seemed to multiply as the trip approached. She moved about the house with excitement, carefully folding clothes, arranging prayer items, and even packing his favorite things so that he would not feel any discomfort during the journey. Her every act was drenched in sincerity. She even sat beside him one evening, speaking with soft warmth about how blessed she felt to perform Umrah at such a young age. To her, it was the greatest gift. To him, however, it was simply the perfect stage to execute his plan. He had spent countless nights sharpening this idea in his mind. Once in Saudi Arabia, he would wait for the right moment to demand her documents. Knowing her blind trust, he was certain she would hand them over without hesitation. When the time came, he would leave her stranded, stripped of identity, and unable to return. It would be as though she had never existed in his life. The thought gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction, a victory he believed he deserved. On the night before their flight, she came and sat at the edge of the bed. Her voice trembled slightly as she said she had seen a frightening dream. In it, she saw him in great danger, trapped in a situation where she could not be by his side. Her eyes filled with tears as she pleaded with him to take care of himself. For a brief moment, her genuine worry startled him. But instead of softening, he hardened. He mocked her words, calling them foolish, and twisted her concern into something laughable. Watching her break down in tears gave him a cruel sense of control. His mother noticed the tension between them the next morning. When she saw her daughter-in-law wiping tears from her face, she scolded him sharply, reminding him that God's blessings should be cherished. "You have been given a virtuous wife," she said firmly, "and you ought to value her." But he dismissed her words with irritation, telling her not to waste time lecturing him. With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving behind a trail of cold silence. Finally, the day of travel arrived. At the airport, his wife walked beside him, holding his arm with quiet pride, her face glowing with anticipation. To strangers, they looked like a happy couple embarking on a sacred journey. But inside his heart, darkness lurked. Every step he took brought him closer to the cruel scheme he had crafted. She thought she was walking toward the Holy Lands. He knew he was leading her into abandonment. The plane roared as it cut through the skies, carrying them toward Saudi Arabia. His wife sat by the window, her face glowing with excitement. She pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, whispering prayers under her breath. Every now and then, she turned to him with a radiant smile, her eyes filled with gratitude for this opportunity. To her, this journey was sacred. To him, it was the stage for betrayal. As the hours passed, she leaned closer, speaking softly. "I feel so blessed," she said, clutching his arm gently, "to be here with you, on our way to the Holy Land. I can't explain how much this means to me." He pulled his arm away, irritation flashing in his eyes. "You talk too much," he muttered coldly. Her smile faltered, but she did not complain. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her lips moving silently in prayer once again. After a while, she gathered courage to speak of the dream she had shared before. Her voice shook, but she said, "I'm afraid something bad might happen. Please, promise me you'll be careful." He turned to her with a mocking smirk. "Your dreams are nonsense. You always bring negativity wherever you go." The sharpness of his words cut into her, and she turned her face away, tears slipping down her cheeks. He watched with a twisted satisfaction, as though her pain validated his cruelty. When the plane landed, they walked through the airport together. Strangers noticed her modest beauty despite her abaya and hijab. A passing couple even complimented her, remarking how fortunate he was to have such a graceful wife. His chest tightened with jealousy. Though he had never desired her love, the thought of others admiring her unsettled him. For the first time, he looked closely at her features, the softness of her eyes, the innocence in her smile, and instead of stirring affection, it stirred anger. He tightened his grip on her arm, hissing under his breath, "This is why women like you dress up, to draw attention." She flinched but said nothing. Even in humiliation, she chose silence. Her loyalty was unwavering, her patience endless. Yet his bitterness only grew. As they moved through the bustling airport, she clung to his side, believing they were beginning a journey together. But in his mind, he was already calculating the moment he would strip her of her identity, leave her helpless, and walk away. That night, as they settled into their temporary lodging, she carefully placed his belongings in order, asking if he was comfortable. He gave no reply. She sat near his feet, massaging them with gentle devotion. When she lifted his foot to her lips and kissed it, he smirked with disdain. To him, it was proof of her weakness. To her, it was an act of love. The gulf between them widened, though she could not yet see it. The days in Saudi Arabia unfolded with a rhythm of devotion for her and a rhythm of deceit for him. She woke each morning with excitement, preparing for visits to the sacred places she had long dreamt of seeing. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke about the blessings of being there, her voice trembling with gratitude. To her, this journey was the fulfillment of prayers whispered for years. To him, it was the execution of the cruelest plan he had ever conceived. One afternoon, as they prepared to leave for the Holy Mosque, she handed him a small pouch. Inside were their passports, identification papers, and travel documents. "Please keep these with you," she said softly. "I'm afraid I might misplace them." "At least in your hands they will be safe." She smiled with innocence, trusting him completely. He accepted them with a cold nod, hiding the triumphant glint in his eyes. At last, he held the key to her downfall. That evening, she clung to his arm as they walked toward the sacred grounds. Her heart brimmed with joy, while his brimmed with malice. As she gazed up at the minarets, whispering prayers of gratitude, he silently rehearsed his escape. Every step brought him closer to the moment where he would cut her off from his life forever. Yet a strange unease stirred within him. Watching her face illuminated by faith, seeing her bow her head in humility, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar: guilt. For a fleeting instant, he asked himself if he was truly capable of abandoning such a loyal woman in a foreign land. But as quickly as the thought appeared, he crushed it beneath layers of bitterness. "She deserves this," he told himself. "She was forced into my life. Now I will force her out." The next morning, he began to create distance. While she was busy in prayer, he slipped away to make arrangements for his departure. She looked for him with anxious eyes when he returned, her voice filled with relief. "I thought I lost you," she said. He laughed dryly, replying, "Soon you will." She looked at him with confusion, but before she could ask more, he brushed her aside. Later that day, he fulfilled his plan. He escorted her to the mosque, watched her lose herself in devotion, and then quietly walked away, her documents hidden securely in his possession. To her, he was only a step behind. To him, she was already erased. As he boarded a plane bound for Egypt, he allowed himself a twisted smile. He believed he had won, that the life he despised was finally behind him. What he did not know was that fate was preparing to unravel his confidence in ways he could never imagine. Egypt's heat pressed down on him as he stepped out of the airport. He carried himself with an air of victory, believing he had finally escaped the chains of his unwanted marriage. His wife was gone, left behind without documents, stripped of identity, and, in his mind, erased from his future. Now, with lightness in his steps, he prepared to meet his old friend Osman, the man who had once been his closest companion in business and pleasure. But fate rarely unfolds as planned. As he walked through the crowded streets toward Osman's neighborhood, he felt eyes following him. At first, he dismissed the unease as paranoia, but soon uniformed officers surrounded him. "You are under arrest," one of them said sharply, gripping his arm. Confused and angry, he demanded, "What for?" "I've done nothing." But his protests fell on deaf ears. They dragged him into a police van, and his heart began to pound with dread. At the station, the accusations became clear. He was being implicated in a murder. His mind reeled as the officers detailed the case. A man had been killed months earlier, and evidence suggested his involvement. Then came the name that froze his blood: Osman. It was Osman's testimony that placed him at the scene. Osman, his trusted friend, had vanished after the crime, but now from abroad he had given statements pointing to him as an accomplice. Memories rushed back like a storm. He remembered that night when Osman had appeared at his door, trembling, insisting he help dispose of a body. He had refused at first, but Osman had threatened him, claiming he would blame the entire crime on him. Against his will, he had followed Osman to the outskirts, but police patrols had forced them to flee. Osman had escaped the country soon after, leaving him to carry the stain of suspicion. Now the trap was closing. The officers sneered as they shoved him into a cold, dark cell. "You'll rot here," one of them muttered. "Be grateful we aren't hanging you." He tried to explain, to plead that Osman was the real murderer, but no one listened. In their eyes, he was already guilty. That night, sitting on the hard floor of the prison, he buried his head in his hands. The irony cut deeper than the iron bars. He had abandoned his wife, thinking he had freed himself. Yet here he was, caged and powerless, framed for a crime he had not committed. For the first time, the cruelty of his own deeds echoed back at him. His plan for freedom had led only to chains. The days inside the Egyptian prison dragged on like years. Each hour felt heavier than the last, filled with the stench of damp walls, the clang of iron doors, and the sneers of guards who treated him as if he were already condemned. Sleep came in restless fragments, haunted by visions of Osman's smirking face and his wife's tearful eyes. For the first time, he began to taste the bitterness of helplessness, the same helplessness he had so cruelly forced upon her. One evening, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The guard unlocked his cell and announced, "You have a visitor." He looked up in surprise, and there stood his father. Age had bent his shoulders, and grief lined his face, but his eyes still carried the authority of a man who had always spoken the truth. He sat down across from his son, his voice trembling yet firm. "I warned you," his father said quietly. "I told you Osman was not the kind of man you should trust. I told you to stay away from him, but you ignored me. And now look at where you are." His son lowered his head, shame pressing down on him harder than the prison walls. For a moment, he wanted to defend himself, to shout that he was innocent, but the weight of guilt inside him had already silenced his tongue. Finally, he whispered, "I did something worse." His father's brows furrowed. Worse? Tears welled in his eyes as he confessed, "I left her. I left my wife in Saudi Arabia without her papers. I wanted her gone. I thought if I abandoned her, my life would finally be free. I didn't care what happened to her. I wanted her erased." His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. The silence that followed was heavier than any chain. His father's breath grew unsteady, his eyes glistening with tears he tried to hold back. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with sorrow. "You betrayed not just her, but yourself. She was pure, loyal, and innocent, and you left her to be humiliated in a foreign land. Son, this is not just Osman's trap. This is God's justice." The words pierced his soul. He could no longer run from the truth. He saw his wife's innocent smile, her silent tears, her devotion, and his cruelty in contrast. Shame gnawed at his heart until he could hardly breathe. That night, when the guards locked him back inside, he sank to his knees, trembling. The prison was not his greatest punishment. His true prison was guilt, and there was no escape from it. Nights in the prison stretched endlessly. He would lie awake on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling, hearing only the rattling of chains and the distant cries of other prisoners. Yet beneath all the noise, another sound haunted him, the echo of her voice. The very voice he once despised now rang in his ears with unbearable sweetness. He remembered the way she used to call his name gently, the way her tone softened when she asked if he had eaten, the way her whispers turned into prayers for his safety. He had once dismissed those words as irritating, but now he longed for them more than anything in the world. The silence of the cell became his torment. When the guards shouted at him, he almost felt relief, because it reminded him he was not completely alone. But as the darkness returned, his conscience grew louder. Each cruel act he had done to his wife replayed before his eyes. Every time he mocked her dreams, ignored her tears, humiliated her in front of strangers. He felt the sting of regret more painfully than any whip or blow from the guards. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he dropped to his knees on the hard ground. His forehead touched the dusty floor as he whispered, "God, forgive me. I was blind. I destroyed the one blessing you gave me. She was patient, loyal, and pure, but I crushed her heart. Please, give me one chance to make it right." His sobs echoed in the small cell, his body trembling as though his soul were being torn apart. Days passed, but his prayers only grew more desperate. Every time the guards insulted him, he thought of her patience. Every time he felt hunger gnawing at him, he remembered how she had once saved the best portion of food for him. Every time loneliness crept in, he recalled her sitting silently by his side, asking for nothing except his presence. He realized now that her quiet devotion had been the greatest gift he had ever received, and he had thrown it away. Then, unexpectedly, hope appeared. A new officer joined the station, an honest man who was not blind to corruption. He reviewed old cases, including the one tied to Osman. After days of investigation, he discovered the truth. The evidence was flawed, manipulated, designed to trap an innocent man. This officer began questioning the very foundation of the charges. When the cell door creaked open and the officer stood there, his words felt like a miracle. "You don't belong here. Justice has been twisted against you, but it ends now." For the first time in months, he breathed deeply, his eyes filling with tears. Perhaps God had heard him after all. Perhaps this was the first step toward redemption. Freedom should have tasted sweet, but when he stepped out of the prison gates, he was greeted not by celebration, but by emptiness. The streets felt unfamiliar, the sky too wide and the air heavy with silence. He longed to run home, to feel a sense of belonging again, but when he returned, his worst fears awaited him. The house that once echoed with voices stood locked and lifeless. His parents were gone, taken from the world in a sudden car accident. The news struck him like a hammer. He collapsed on the cold ground outside the gate, his chest heaving with sobs. All his life, his parents had been his shield, the ones who reminded him to value what he had. They had pleaded with him to treat his wife with kindness, to stay away from Osman's influence, to live with gratitude. Now they were gone, and he had no chance to seek their forgiveness. Their absence left a wound deeper than the scars prison had carved into him. His uncle was the only one who remained. A man of honesty and dignity, he had managed the family's business while he was behind bars. When they finally sat together, the uncle placed the records of the business before him and said, "This was never mine to keep. I guarded it as a trust. Now it is time to return it to you." Tears filled his eyes at the selflessness of those words. He tried to argue, telling his uncle he owed him more than he could ever repay, but his uncle simply shook his head. "What I did for family. But there is one duty you must fulfill now. Find your wife. Bring her back if she will return. Without her, your house will never be whole." The words pierced him. For months in prison, guilt had gnawed at him like an endless hunger. Now, with his parents gone, the weight doubled. He thought of his wife wandering alone in Saudi Arabia, stripped of her documents, vulnerable to a world that would not be merciful. Every memory of her obedience now returned as a wound. He saw her tearful eyes, her trembling smile, the way she had clung to his arm with trust. He had broken all of it. Determined, he began preparations. His uncle introduced him to contacts who had lived in Saudi Arabia for years, men who might help him search. As he held the flight ticket in his hand, he whispered a prayer. He no longer desired wealth, freedom, or power. He wanted only one thing, a chance to find her, to fall at her feet, and to beg for the forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. Saudi Arabia was not an easy place for him to return to. Every street, every sound reminded him of what he had done. Yet he pressed forward, driven by a desperate need for redemption. Through the help of his uncle's old contacts, he began searching. He asked in markets, approached families, and knocked on doors, always carrying with him the weight of shame. Days stretched into weeks, until at last, a kind-hearted sheikh told him, "I have seen the woman you describe. She lives with a noble Arab lady who has sheltered her." His heart pounded as he followed the sheikh to the address. The house was large, its gates opening into a courtyard where flowers bloomed in neat rows. And there, sitting in the garden, he saw her. She was no longer the fragile, tearful woman he had left behind. She sat with quiet dignity, a child by her side, a boy with innocent eyes and features that mirrored his own. The sight crushed him. That was his son, the child he had never met. Overwhelmed, he stumbled forward and fell at her feet. Tears streamed down his face as he begged, "Forgive me. I was blind, selfish, and cruel. I destroyed the life you gave me. Please, let me make it right." His voice broke as he clutched the edge of her dress like a desperate man drowning in guilt. She looked down at him with eyes that were no longer filled with love, but with a strength forged through suffering. "Forgive you?" she whispered, her voice steady. "I gave you everything. My loyalty, my obedience, my love. In return, you gave me humiliation and abandonment. I begged for your kindness, but you gave me scorn. I trusted you with my life, and you left me in a foreign land to suffer alone. How can I forget that?" He trembled, unable to speak. The boy looked curiously at him, unaware that the man weeping at his mother's feet was was his father. She pulled the child closer, her voice firm. This is your moment. See him, love him, hold him if you must. But after today, you will not see him again. He is mine to protect, not yours to wound. His chest burned as though his heart had been torn from within. He had lost her forever. With quiet dignity, she asked for legal separation. It was her right, and it was his punishment to grant it. He signed, his hands shaking, tears staining the paper. As he watched her walk away with their child, he realized his greatest punishment was not prison, not Osmond's betrayal, not even the loss of wealth. It was this: to live the rest of his life haunted by the image of the woman he had destroyed and the family he had lost, knowing it was all his own doing.